Yeah. Okay.
And take it away.
Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you. All right, so greetings everyone. My name is Asia McConkey. I'm a fourth-year student at the University of the Fraser Valley in the Bachelor's of Environmental Sciences. I'm a bat ambassador for the Fraser Valley region and currently work at Agriculture Agri-Foods Canada as an undergraduate research assistant for berry entomology at the Agassiz Research Centre. I'm very passionate about bats and bat conservation efforts in BC. And I'm excited to deliver this talk to you all about bat conservation on the South Coast in response to white nose syndrome. Oh, wow. There we go. Okay. So for this presentation, I'll give a few facts about the importance of bats and a quick introduction to the species of bats in our region of British Columbia. Then I will discuss about the threats to bats on the South Coast, which is white nose syndrome. I'll talk about what it is, where it came from, where is it now, and what are we doing about it, and how the LFN Club can help. So for starters, why are bats important? Why does this all matter, right? So I have a few really good facts here that just shows the importance of bats, especially here in Canada and throughout other countries. Bats are key predators for many night-flying insects and are an essential part of BC's ecosystems. They provide billions of dollars in economic benefits to North America by helping control agriculture, forest, and urban pests. Recent studies estimate that bats eat enough pests to save more than $1 billion per year in crop damage and pesticide costs in the United States corn industry alone. Bats are also a bioindicator for our ecosystems. While not in Canada, other bat species feed on nectar and provide critical pollination for a variety of plants like peaches, cloves, bananas, agaves. In fact, bats are a sole pollinator for the agave plant, a key ingredient in tequila. I feel like Dana Green, she's a PhD student with the University of Regina's biology department, says it best that bats are an unloved group of organisms. There are a lot of negative connotations connected with bats, and it's very undeserved. They need to be represented and showed how amazing they really are, especially to farmers and agricultural communities. So, the South Coast bat species. The first thing to note is that all bat species in BC are insectivores. In total, there are 17 bat species in British Columbia, and in our region of the South Coast, there are only 10 species, counting Tadaridae, from the 17 in BC total. This is based on credible acoustic recordings and catch and release surveys. Out of all 17 bat species, they can be split up into two general groups, potato size and tater tots. So the potato size group is described by having a weight of 10 grams to 25 grams, a wingspan of 25 to 40 centimeters. 5 bats on the South Coast fit into this demographic and 3 in the rest of BC. Each bat species fills a particular niche, just like birds. There can be ecological overlap among prey and roost preferences, but there's a lot of specialization too. For example, the big brown bat specializes in eating beetles, while the hoary bat specializes in eating large moths. These examples apply to their habitat preferences as well. So here are photos of the bat species that are in the potato size category. And as you can see, bats are very unique and vary in appearances, ranging from small to large ears and color of their fur. Here's some facts I'm going to give you guys about some of these bat species that you may have never heard before and can also help you familiarize with the species. The hoary bat is the largest bat species here in British Columbia, weighing up to 35 grams. The eastern red bat was named after their red-orange fur coat, And these bats are masters in camouflage, roosting among deciduous trees. When hanging upside down, they appear as dead leaves or pine cones. The Townsend big-eared bat has the most notable trait among any bat, having the largest ears. These ears on a Townsend big-eared bat is half its body length and can also be identified by two prominent glandular swellings on its nose. Silver-haired bat species will roost in a variety of structural defects in trees, including old woodpecker holes that have been abandoned. The big brown bat can be identified by having a swollen-like muzzle, where size at times can be hard to determine as an ID trait. Research has also shown that these bat species roost more successfully in human buildings than in natural rock crevices. The spotted bat, also known as the pinto bat, is one of the most distinct species here in BC. This bat echolocates an extremely low frequency, making this the only bat in Western Canada that has an echolocation call that can be heard without a bat detector. The call of this bat sounds like a high-pitched metallic click. The pallid bat is the only species in BC with two pairs of lower incisors and is well adapted to killing and eating large invertebrates. And finally, the Mexican free-tailed bat can have huge roost colonies up into the millions. And in these large colonies, it's estimated to eat 250 tons of insects every night. The densest concentration of free-tailed bats are found living in Bracken Cave near San Antonio, Texas, where their colony numbers can have over 20 million bats. Entering into our tater tot category, these groups are described by having a weight of 4 to 8 grams and a wingspan of 20 to 25 centimeters. 5 bats on the South Coast fit into this demographic, and 4 in the rest of BC. Here are 3 of the bat species that fit into the tater tot groups on the South Coast. You have the long-legged myotis, the western long-eared myotis, and the California myotis. As you can see here, just from these 3 bats, the myotis generally look pretty similar. In fact, these bats are not as physically distinctive compared to their larger other bat species. When comparing the little brown myotis and the Yuma myotis, they're so similar that even experts have a hard time even identifying the species as separate, that the only way to determine these species is by taking guano samples. So the one thing these bat species on the South Coast of BC have in common is that they are understudied, particularly on the West Coast. We don't have great baseline data, as we have been a priority until very recently due to white nose syndrome. But bat species on the West Coast also differ in ecology compared to the East Coast. This involves understanding their overwintering and hibernation behavior. On the East Coast, bats hibernate in large hibernaculums. This refers to a site where one or more bats hibernate in winter. Hibernacula provides cold, constant temperatures and protection from weather and predators. Rock features with suitable characteristics for hibernation by bats are relatively scarce across the landscape and therefore are typically used by several species of bats at once. In British Columbia, bats don't use cave sites available to them as often as they do in Eastern Canada. Instead, bats use sites that are less accessible to humans, which makes tracking white nose syndrome even more difficult. There are no large bat hibernacula in the West like in the East. Instead, bats overwinter in smaller numbers in rock crevices, trees, caves, and mines, and even some buildings. Bat biologists are on the lookout for other types of hibernacula, but in the meantime, we're not going to see white nose syndrome like in the east of Canada. We're not going to be seeing moldy bats all over the place or encounter piles of dead bats. If we're paying attention, we're simply going to notice there are fewer and fewer bats on our landscape in the summer here on the West Coast. So what exactly is the deadly white nose syndrome? White nose syndrome is touted as the most catastrophic wildlife disease to hit North America in recorded history. The white nose syndrome is caused by a fungus called Pseudomonas destructans, but I will be referring to this fungus as PD. PD are cryophilic, which means it grows and thrives in low temperatures, meaning that the best place for PD to grow in is caves. The fungus grows best at low temperatures associated with bat hibernation, 4 degrees to 10 degrees Celsius. They can also thrive in high humidities. PD is Eurasian in origin. The Eurasian bats are resistant to its effects or only dying at very low rates. European bats may be resistant to the disease because they are generally bigger than comparable species in the US. Also, European colonies tend to be not as large as ones found on the other side of the Atlantic. It's not clear how PD arrived to North America, but some suggest that it has been caused by human dispersal, so spores attaching onto boots, clothing, or equipment, and then going into caves. As you can see, the fungus covers a large portion of the wings and on the bat's nose. The PD penetrates the wing membrane, causes respiratory acidosis, excess potassium, increased energy loss, increased arousal to deal with the symptoms, which then depletes reserves, causing a feedback loop. In summary, white nose syndrome causes bats to wake from hibernation, using limited fat reserves, leading to death from hypothermia and starvation. There have been huge declines in the big three, which are the little brown, northern myotis, and tricolor bats. The big three were all listed endangered as of 2015 in the East. However, not all bat species are impacted the same by white nose syndrome. The big three, when infected by PD, resulted in white nose syndrome, have a mortality rate greater than 90%. But larger bat species tend to fare better. For example, the big brown bat has a mortality rate at around 25% due to white nose syndrome. So where is it? White nose syndrome was first detected in the New York State in 2006. Since then, it has spread by 200 kilometers a year. And in 2016, it was found in the Washington state. The reason for this dispersal is because of bat-to-bat transmission. It is by far the main way it has spread. A bat will pick up spores and fungus in one cave and move to another, which continues the spread. There's a lot of movement that happens on the shoulder seasons during the spring and fall with these bats, and they can transfer the spores to new hibernation sites. So we're going to look at the spread of white nose syndrome starting in 2006. We can see the first detection of white nose syndrome in the New York State. 2007, there was a very small increase in range, but still within the borders of the New York State. By 2008, we can just see how fast white nose syndrome spreads, with the fungus making its way toward the Canadian border. In 2009, we start seeing white nose syndrome spreading across the Appalachian Mountains. By 2010, white nose syndrome has fully entered Canada. In 2011, white nose syndrome is detected in Newfoundland and Labrador and continues to spread down the Appalachian Mountains. 2012, the patches continued to increase, moving to east in North America. 2013, the range continues, now being found in St. Louis and Chicago. 2014, we can see white nose syndrome numbers are increasing even more. And by 2015, we can see white nose syndrome has been observed entering into the Great Plains of the United States. So we were hoping we had another 10 years before it made it over the Rocky Mountains, but we were wrong. This is a classic pattern for human mediated spread. Molecular analysis suggests it was definitely a North American strain, and the closest match was in Kentucky. And as you can see, white nose syndrome had made its leap all the way over to Seattle. In 2017, white nose syndrome was found in the state of Texas and crossed the border of Manitoba. In 2018, white nose syndrome was found further among the Great Plains of the US, heading towards the Rocky Mountains. And by 2019, white nose syndrome increased within Washington state and was found in the state of California. White nose syndrome has greatly impacted the population of bats in the US and Canada. While declines are difficult to estimate, the US Fish and Wildlife Survey in 2011 stated that around 5.7 to 6.7 million bats have died. Such a mass die-off of bats will likely have far-reaching effects on the ecosystems and human industries like forestry and agriculture. Researchers found that bats save farmers anywhere from $12 to $173 an acre a year in pesticide cost. A scientific research paper published by the University of Chicago stated, as of 2017, agricultural losses from white nose syndrome were between $426 and $495 million per year. These estimates of ecosystem service values really show the importance of bats are to our agriculture pest management systems. Just by looking at 2011 and comparing it to 2019, it appears that white nose syndrome increases distribution range by almost 50%. This map shows the new confirmed locations of white nose syndrome from 2020 to 2021. As you can see, white nose syndrome spread to the states of Montana and Wyoming. From 2021 to 2022, white nose syndrome is confirmed more throughout the states of Montana and Wyoming, In Canada, white nose syndrome was confirmed in Alberta. Now in the year 2023, white nose syndrome is about to make its impact on BC. In April of 2023, the fungus that causes white nose syndrome, P. destructans, was detected in Back Wano in the Grand Forks area. Above is a map that shows the location of Grand Forks. Vancouver is only a 4-hour drive away from Grand Forks, so it's inevitable that white nose syndrome will soon be found in Metro Vancouver. However, bat conservation teams, biologists, and researchers have been preparing for white nose syndrome here in BC. There are groups rallying to respond to white nose syndrome. For example, in BC, we have BC Bats, which focuses on helping bats and people. There is also the British Columbia Bat Action Team, BC Bat, which is a group of professional biologists, academic researchers, veterinarians, environmental educators, students, naturalists, wildlife rehabilitators, government biologists, and individuals who are interested in bat conservation in BC. US agencies are also really taking this seriously. A lot of research has been conducted on the mechanisms of infection, but it's still early and mitigation understandably lags behind. A problem to researching mitigation methods is that we need to know the wintering locations of bats on the West Coast to assess effects on population, which we know very little about. Bats also clean PD off of them in the summer, so it's hard to track them as well. Just tracking the spread is difficult. The only way to know if white nose syndrome is found within a region is by finding bat carcasses that contain the fungus. Mortality is also very high. It's difficult to study virulence. Most research is done in the lab and in fridges. So there are other factors that will impact this research when applied in the field. Prevention is pretty tough because bats move too far, too fast, and into too many roosts. You can almost say that when white nose syndrome is spotted, the bat's out of the bag. But there has been many ideas for management approaches. In general, everyone's looking for an answer. Obviously, culling is not a sustainable method because we want to protect bat population numbers, not reduce them. Given the dispersal aspect of the problem and the complexity of hibernating bat ecology, these factors together certainly mean that culling would not work in the case of bats. Traditional fungicides tend to be toxic, and any manipulation of bats during hibernation tends to end poorly. This also goes towards fungal viruses. Polyethylene glycol, I will refer to it as PEG, is a polyether compound derived from petroleum with many applications from industrial manufacturing to medicine. PEG has previously been used in agriculture to control fungal plant pathogens and suggests it may inhibit PD growth in bat roosts. This can be a good choice in management, but not selective and only feasible in certain hibernaculas. Chitosan is a sugar that comes from the outer skeleton of shellfish, including crab, lobster, and shrimp. It's used as a medicine and in drug manufacturing. Chitosan also stimulates wound healing with anti-inflammatory properties and is a candidate to decrease the infection rate and limit tissue damage incurred by white nose syndrome infected bats. It's not toxic to bats and has a strong wound healing effect. However, there are problems. The first issue is that it's non-specific to PD, and you would have to put it directly on bats. And obviously, this is not a sustainable method. Rhodococcus rhodochrosus is a bacterium used as a soil inoculant in agriculture and horticulture. It produces a Bach cloud, so that's nice because you don't need direct contact. However, it's not residual, so that there's also a problem with that. In very recent work, 2019, using a recombinant of raccoon poxy virus out of Wisconsin, it looked promising, but it still hasn't had the results we're looking for. But then people started asking, what about those bats that get the fungus but don't get white nose syndrome? So here on this slide, I will discuss about the bat species that experience white nose syndrome and bat species that have been detected carrying the fungus but not experiencing the effects of white nose syndrome. Here are the bats that contain the species that will experience white nose syndrome when contacted with the fungus. The little brown myotis and the northern myotis has seen huge declines in the east. Overall, 75% in affected regions and 90 to 100% at site level. and are now listed as endangered species in Canada. The Yuma myotis and the long-eared myotis are new species added to the endangered list since PD arrived in its range. Western bat ecology differs so much from the East Coast, we really don't know how things are going to work here. But as said before, larger bats don't seem to experience white nose syndrome. Some bat species have much lower mortality rates due to white nose syndrome, 20 to 30% in big brown bats at a site level. Some studies have even actually showed an increase in the number of bat species using the same cave. So research in probiotics is being conducted on potentially slowing or stopping the spread of white nose syndrome. However, one factor in finding a solution to white nose syndrome is that each bat species has a different external microbiome, which will have different effects on a probiotic. While it's not clear which factors affect vulnerability to this disease, wing microbiome is thought to play a significant role. There must be consideration for knock-on effects. Oh, sorry, my computer doesn't work. Oh no, sorry. Okay, yeah, there must be a consideration for knock-on effects of the rest of the skin microbiome on a bat and study the microbial community on bats pre-white nose syndrome. There should also be consideration on fragile cave microbial communities. The microbiome on a bat changes when they survive from the fungus that causes white nose syndrome. This is why we need to also look at and research fragile cave microbial communities, because this can impact bat species' external microbiomes. Pseudomonas fluorescens is a bacteria that was recognized as being a protective agent for the big brown bat in early studies on white nose syndrome. This shows how probiotics are a great tool agent for the big brown bat in helping bats against white nose syndrome. The team, mostly here in BC, has decided to try their take on probiotics and consider microbiomes. The Wild Conservation Society Canada has been the first conservation group to go to the field with a white nose syndrome prevention plan, treating 2 colonies in the Metro Vancouver area. A new treatment is being developed by the Thompson River University, Dr. Narowit Ann Shetland, along with Dr. Corey Lawson of Wildlife Conservation Society, WCS Canada, and Dr. J.P. Zhu of McMaster University, using the principle of probiotics, introducing good bacteria that are helpful to the body in order to prevent the fungal infection that causes white nose syndrome. Being aware that bats behave differently in the winter in the West than they do in the East, their goal is to work on a treatment that will exceed in the West, but also help bats across the continent. Bats were captured, then taken to an enclosure at the BC Wildlife Park. Once in the enclosure, the bats were separated into treatment and control groups. Some thought had went into using local bats from BC to not discount the importance of natural microbial communities. The lab had isolated 14 bacteria and inhibit the growth of the fungus, and some of these microorganisms already occur naturally on some bat wings. The probiotic cocktail they are creating will be applied to bats externally in a powder form while the night flyers exit or enter their summer maternity roosts. This probiotic cocktail ended up being a strategic combination of 4 bacterial strains shown to inhibit the disease-causing fungus. These 4 strains worked better in controlling PD. This probiotic was then tested in 2018 and in 2019 on captive building roosting bats and was conducted that it's effective at changing bat wing microbiomes and slows the growth of the fungus. This project creating the probiotic cocktail has collected bats from these 5 fields and continued research project for protection against white nose syndrome. These are at Colony Farms, Island, Stave Lake, Hayward Lake, and Alice Lake. Over the past 2 years, through collaboration with UBC Okanagan, the WCS has been preparing for the implementation of this mitigation tool, the probiotic, by establishing baseline data at 4 of these maternity roosts in Metro Vancouver. This will enable scientists to compare bat ecology and health pre and post-treatment with white nose syndrome using the probiotic prophylaxis. This research on this new probiotic involves population monitoring, the use of pit tags or bands, and testing probiotic persistence. Population monitoring is for keeping track of the existing bat colonies, watching to see if they remain stable or if their population is increasing or decreasing. Pit tags are trackers that help scientists understand bats' dispersal, roost use, reproduction, and migration behaviors. Probiotic persistence is about making sure that the probiotic stays in the bat and continues to stay on the bat throughout hibernation. Pit tagging allows us to track bat population effects to some extent. PIT is an electronic and implantable microchip. It is actually an acronym for Passive Integrated Transponder. There are very small trackers that are only about 1 millimeter. These PIT tags are placed underneath the skin of a bat, and then an antenna is placed by the exit or outside the roost. So when the bat exits and enters, the PIT tag communicates to the antenna and gives data on the bat's behavior. PIT tags can also be scanned by field researchers, which then can be reported online in a database to collect that information of where the bat's going and when. Comes to testing probiotic persistence, the probiotic was applied as a liquid form on the bats while in the lab. However, this practice isn't the best approach for out in the field. That is why this probiotic was infused into a powder. This powder is then applied to the base of the bat box so the bats can self-apply the compound each time they enter and leave the box. Field trials will show us whether the microbes will persist on the bats through hibernation. At roost entrances, they will dust powdered clay infused with the probiotics so it sticks correctly to the bats. They'll get a small dose every time they come and go, but the bat will be checked if the probiotics is able to stay on the bat during the whole season. The main goal of introducing the probiotic gradually is that it does not overwhelm the bat's immune system. Taking wing swab samples from the bats and repeating them in the spring to see if the probiotic is still there and viable. Other white nose syndrome surveillance research involves collecting reported or observed bat carcasses during the winter. Bat swabs will also be conducted during early spring when bats start waking up and emerging from hibernation. Another method researchers are doing is collecting guano samples, which can show if the fungus PD was found in bats. If you find a bat carcass that shows a sign of white nose syndrome and bats that are flying are found dead during winter and early spring, you can call BC Community Bat Program at 1-855-922-2287. British Columbia is better positioned than many other western regions thanks to BC Community Bat Programs that encourage individuals to identify roost sites and show landowners how to protect these sites. Oh my goodness, that was bad. Identify roost sites and show landowners how to protect these sites or install bat houses. There are many ways that the Langley community can volunteer and get involved in bat conservation. The best way that the Langley Field Naturalists Club can do is to get involved in bat conservation is volunteer to conduct colony counts in the summer. The BC Bat Annual Count is a citizen science program to annually monitor bat populations in roost sites. Monitoring these maternity colonies can give biologists a good idea of how bat populations in an area are doing from year to year. With the occurrence of white nose syndrome in North America, monitoring these colonies is more important than ever. If you're interested in participating in the colony bat counts, feel free to ask me any questions, for I have done the colony counts for Abbotsford in 2022 and will continue to in 2023. The second way is by becoming a bat ambassador. The role of a bat ambassador is 6 easy steps. Promote bat conservation of our BC bat species, correct misconceptions about bats and improve public perception on them, increase awareness of the BC Bat Community Program and regional community bat programs and the resources they have available, collect valuable data on bats, including bat counts and white nose syndrome surveillance, deliver bat educational programs. An example would be park entrepreneurs, biologists, and naturalists who are interested in science, communication, and education with consistent goals and messaging. And finally, promote bat-friendly communities in BC. If you're interested in becoming a bat ambassador, you can contact Amy Mitchell. But what is a bat-friendly community? The last way to contribute to bat conservation is to help make Langley a certified bat-friendly community. This is a certificate given to cities that incorporate bat habitats into planning processes, reduces direct threats to bats, and promotes education and awareness of bats. The end result is a town where the bat habitat is valued and protected, where citizens are aware of bats and the threats they face locally and nationally, and where citizens are engaged in educational and stewardship activities to protect bats and bat habitat. Currently, the communities in BC that have been certified are Dawson's Creek, Peachland, Delta, and just recently Port Moody. I believe that as a community, we can come together and help make not only Langley and Abbotsford a bat-friendly community, especially with white nose syndrome at our door so close. On this note, I'd like to thank you all and the Langley Field Naturalists Club for listening to my presentation. I'd like to thank Amy Mitchell and Chris Curry for their current research and the work with mitigating white nose syndrome, and for Amy helping prepare the presentation. I'd like to thank the Langley Field Naturalists Club for letting me present here today. If you wish to contact Amy Mitchell or the BC Bat Community Program, I have available emails and phone numbers here. And if you'd like to do more research on your own about white nose syndrome and what you can do for bat conservation, I've provided many website links for everyone to access. And if I'm ready, if you have any questions. All right. Oh. Asia. Yeah, I like the continent. Sure, you have one. Yeah. So we don't know exactly how it crossed, but we definitely know it's some type of human dispersal. Like I said, fungus can easily spread, especially with spores. You couldn't even see it because it's so microscopic. And it can be people who are rock climbing or who are nature enthusiasts that are not aware that the fungus could be in a cave or in an area, and then that gets over back to Seattle. Because I don't think a bat could, I don't think any species can find one route all the way to Seattle. Oh, yeah. Sure. I definitely. So, the question was about do we educate the rock climbing community, any cavers? Not to my knowledge, I don't know if Amy's talked to them, but I think that's a really good idea. And I also personally rock climb, so I think it's a good way to educate, especially the climbers and like that this could be a threat. And if you're going to cave systems, that's really good to spread it to other known colony sites. Yeah, exactly.
You may be aware that our BC wide nature meeting where we've actually going and watching the
Oh. Oh wow.
So they counted at that time.
I will say she asked a question about the colony counts. Those start from August is when it ends. Count the colony 2 times from June to the beginning of July. Oh, fantastic. Okay, thanks. Yeah. I don't think we have tracked that yet. And the question was, do birds carry PD, the fungus that causes white nose syndrome? Not to my knowledge, there's been no papers or research done if birds carry the fungus. If that would be it, not a lot of birds interact with bats because, birds are during the day, bats come out at night. So I think it'd be interesting if they could, but I don't think they are currently, no. Yeah. Yeah, the question was if you spot a dead bat during the time of spring and winter, you can call BC Community Bat Program. So that's the number you'd reach. You can find this number on the BC government website and also by looking up BC Bats online. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, the question was the application of probiotics at the colony bat counts. So we're testing this probiotic at the sites that we know that there's colonies at, like bat boxes or sites that we are aware of. And what this powder form is meant to do is promoting this bacteria that helps fight against white nose syndrome. And it is good because it works on multiple species. Like I've stated, that bats all have different microbiomes on their wings and their skin. So we're hoping this probiotic is kind of like the probiotic yogurt or cocktail to allow all bats to experience the benefits of this medicine. The question was, do I recommend all bat boxes to have this probiotic? I think that would probably be the end goal. But with any medication or working with medicine or bacteria, it's important to have those test trials before the government confirms further spread of this probiotic. So once it's confirmed, I can see it possibly spreading to more bat boxes, which we have here as an example of a bat box. Yeah, the question was, is there's other collaborators with the project? There's many collaborators, as far as I know, especially in BC, but it's also in the United States. It's on the East Coast. It's in the mid-range of Canada. A lot of scientists and conservation branches are all working together because this is affecting bats everywhere. So all bats are affected from Canada, United States, because as you can see, it was even noticed in Texas. So it's understanding though the communities, because our bat species have their own communities and their different bacteria and microbiomes. So working together to find the correct probiotic or resistance to help diminish the effects is what matters the most. So yeah. Yeah. Sure. The question was, has this event happened before? I kind of stated this in the topic, but white nose syndrome has been around for a long time, but in Europe where it originates. And bats there are accustomed to this fungus, so they're able to build up a resilience and not have such a high mortality rate. So when it crossed over to North America in 2006, these bats have been living in Canada, United States, perfectly fine without white nose syndrome. And then when it comes, it just devastates their system. They don't know how to respond to it. They don't have the bacteria or the microbiome to fight up against it. So that's why it's such a devastating impact, because we haven't seen a huge threat like this to bat species in North America ever before. So yeah. Yes. Yeah. I was gonna say that, but I was like, I don't want to compare humans to bats. Yeah. Yeah. The question was, is white nose syndrome killing them directly, or is it causing them to die? Yeah. So white nose syndrome, what it does, it's not like a virus where it comes and it is actively killing you. Bats need to hibernate because they have limited fat stores to survive the winter. And what the fungus does, it continuously grows on their nose, on their wings, and their skin, that they have so much energy, and it like kind of makes the bat delusional and fly out and use all their reserves, and they'll fly out into the cold and just die. And that's why we have in the East Coast with huge colonies all these dead bats and these moldy bats, because they can't get it off. They are not able to fight it a bit against it. They wake up, they use all their reserves, and they'll die from the cold. So yeah. Yeah. The question was, how big is the organization? BC Bats is pretty widespread. Like, that's the first organization for me to personally find out about bats. It's usually the first way you get into bat conservation. It's built up with a lot of volunteers, biologists, coordinators, environmentalists. So I can't give you a number of how many members, but it is pretty large. Yeah. Yeah. The question was, do we know how many bats are in the lower mainland? And I can tell you for certain, we have no idea. So like, bats are hard to like track, as I say. Like they're not like birds where we can easily put a metal tag on them. They tend to not like that at all and can really disrupt or even die from stress. So that's an issue. The fact that it's at night, the limited visibility, especially on the West Coast, we don't know where they're winter roosting sites are. Bats are very understudied here, but now with white nose syndrome, they're finally getting the attention they need. So we could get more of an estimate, but right now, we don't really have an exact number for bat species. So yeah, yeah, yeah. Mhm. Oh, yeah, like are you talking like winter roosts, or yeah? Yeah, the question was there's a bat box that's built up in Surrey and the roost site is unknown. And that's common. We don't know a lot where bats go to roost in winter. But I know there are studies being conducted right now, especially by a biologist that graduated from Saskatchewan who is doing the research to try and track bats and where they're going during the winter. So hopefully, maybe in the next 2 years or so, we might have actual answers of where they're going during that winter period. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's bad. Oh, that's a great question. The question was, is how long do bats live for? A huge misconception is that bats are rodents, and they're not. And they actually have one of the longest lifespans for a small mammal. There was a bat species that was tracked to be 48 to 50 years old. Most bats have a lifespan of 30 to 40 years old. So bats have a lifespan half of humans. So it's really interesting, and they have very dense family communities, almost like a language system, but like that's more research. But yeah, they're very fascinating and they're very intelligent. So it's something I'm super interested in. Yeah. So the question is, do all bats hibernate in caves or do they hibernate in trees? Especially like different bat species will want to hibernate in different locations. Some bat species, like the big brown bat and the little myotis, they like human structures. So a lot of the time you'll find those in human buildings. There are a lot of bats like the eastern red bat that like to hibernate in deciduous trees because they blend better. Or the silver bat that likes to hibernate or roost in old woodpecker holes or wooden crevices in trees. So it's a lot to do with depending on the species and how often, like how big their roost is. Because usually the bigger roost, they'll need a bigger crevice, like a cave or a building structure or a cave mine or something like that. So yeah, yeah. The question was, are bats blind? And that is another misconception. They're not blind. They have great vision. So not only do they have great vision, they have echolocation. So they almost have like a better sense than we could ever have. So yeah. Oh, we'll get this person back. Okay, so the question was, do bats have lots of predators? And if a predator were to eat a bat that was infected, would the predator be affected? Definitely, I don't think so. Like any if a predator would eat a bat, they would not be carrying the syndrome. White nose syndrome has not been found to affect any other species other than bats, so we don't have to worry about another pandemic. Um, but yeah, bats do have lots of predators, and they do have issues when it comes to bat boxes, which is being looked at. For example, house cats. House cats are a huge threat to bat populations. I think cats in general, just like killing a lot of species we love. Raccoons and other small predators like to target bats by climbing the wooden pole that these are put on. So a new method that's been trying to help prevent raccoons and cats from going into bat roosts and trying to attack them is by putting almost like a plastic sheath that they'll slip on and they can't use their claws. So it prevents any access into getting into the bat box. So yeah, good question. For the bird seeds, yeah. Yeah, and they jump. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So the question was, is what is the facts about rabies in bats? Like any animal, like a raccoon or a coyote, they can experience rabies, but the misconception of bats always having rabies is obviously false. I think it was like less than 1%, like 0.1% of bats actually carry rabies. So it's very, 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 very low. And it's usually easy to tell if an animal or a bat is experiencing rabies by flying during the day, acting very like viral, like they can't control themselves, or they're able to go around humans without having that instinct to be afraid. So I'm not like I like count colonies, right? And I'll have bats swoop all around me. Never had an issue. I never had an issue with bats wanting to bite me or anything. So obviously, and then we also have the rabies vaccine. So I think there was only one case of a rabies in 2016. And yeah, that was it. The case, like when what? I think it was in BC. Yeah, it was a person. Yeah. Yeah, the question is, how do you determine a bat is intelligent? That's a lot to do with ecology and researchers. A lot of research is done through that in the States. I wish I can get his name, but he's an amazing scientist out in Texas who's a bat biologist, and he studies bat behavior and calls. And we can look at the echolocation meters and frequency of bats and their communication. And for example, the reason why we think that bats may have their own names, like they're able to identify themselves by names, is because of a special click each bat will say to each other. And also having to analyze and watch bats in a certain colony over time. So this is like your study. So yeah, it's super interesting. Maybe afterwards I can show you. There's like a video documentary podcast about bat intelligence. It's really interesting. Yeah. 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 I think you did the best that you could do. The question is like what's the best way to handle a bat? Um, Personally, like safety wise for any animal, try not to use your hands. Use like if you had it in a jar, use like a sheath underneath to carry it out. Usually the bats, once it's away, you'll fly or try to climb to a higher place. I will say that you did catch a bat, you need to put it somewhere, put it against a tree, put it somewhere it can climb. Bats in BC can't naturally fly like a bird from the ground. They have to get up above, I think above 5 feet to actually reach height to fly. So it's almost like a springboard. The only bat I think I know that can fly from off the ground is the vampire bat. And obviously we don't have those in Canada. So nothing to worry. Exactly. Put it as something where a structure they can climb on so they can be safe and find somewhere to hide because the grass is too open for them. Yeah. Yes. I have. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, go right ahead. There's tons of publications all about bat information, conservation, what to do if bats are found in your house, how to develop BC bat communities. So feel free to take some publications. So yeah.